Welcome to Target Market Insights, the multifamily and marketing podcast. Each week, John Kasman interviews multifamily and marketing experts to teach you how to find the best places to invest, attract investors, and grow your portfolio. You are listening to Target Market Insights with your host, John Kasman.
Welcome to Target Market Insights, the multifamily and marketing show. I'm your host, John Kasman, and I want to thank you for joining us for another great episode. Now, if you're enjoying this show, do me one quick favor and leave us a rating and review. It really helps us and helps other people find this show and helps us get more exposure for the great content that you're getting. Now, if you haven't already, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Now, today we're going to be talking to Derick Van Ness. Derick Van Ness is a wealth strategist who is passionate about helping people reach their full potential. His company, Big Life Financial, focuses on removing the mystery and misinformation surrounding money and financial strategy so people can live their life without having any regrets. Let's welcome to the show, Mr. Derick Van Ness.
Happy to be here, John. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Derick, listen, it's great to have you on the show. I went very high level on your background and your bio. Why don't you give us more context to who you are and how you came to found Big Life Financial?
Wow, there's a lot to that. But I guess the short version of it is, my whole life, I knew I wanted to be around business, right? Just because I grew up, had a father who was, he was a construction contractor, but I just saw the advantages of him being able to maneuver, right? As the economy got better or worse. At one point in the 80s, construction where I grew up was really slow, and he was able to go to California and work and do jobs over there and bring home money and kind of maneuver and adapt to the situation. And I never really kind of forgot that lesson. So my whole life I felt like, I want to be the wheel, not a cog in the wheel, not having to be dependent on someone else for my income, or at least a single individual. Obviously you have to deal with other people, right? But yeah, that always stuck with me. And so when I came out of school, I got a business degree, mostly because I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And I figured everything's a business, whether it's a dance studio or a swimming pool or, a financial firm. So I got a business degree, went to work in basically the hardest job I could find, which was kind of like a boiler room type of setup where we did equipment financing for business owners. Because I thought, hey, I get to see how credit works. I get to see people's financials. I get to talk to business owners, and I really get to see like what's going on behind the scenes, how do banks work, all that stuff. And I did 3 years of that, about 50,000 cold calls. Got really used to talking to strangers, which is a pretty good skill to have, and that really carried me through to my first business, which was real estate investing. As it turns out, I was doing single families. And at the time, I didn't know they were called fix and flips. It was like buy an ugly house, fix it up and resell it, because this is 2001-ish. And there were no TV shows or any of that stuff. I didn't even know it was a thing, right? I was like, yeah, I make $80,000 a year as a salesperson, but I'm working like 13, 14 hours a day. Or I can buy a house, hang out, fix it up with my construction background, sell it a couple months later, make 20 or 30 grand, do that 2 or 3 times a year and make the same money. That seemed like a pretty good trade for me at 26 years old or 28 years old. So I got into that, and I very quickly realized that like that's a real business. And fast forward a couple of years later, we were doing 20 to 30 of those a year. Had two office managers, kind of one that was the lead and one that was an assistant, a sales guy who was helping me close deals, and was employing 3 contracting crews to fix these houses in Los Angeles. So we were just cranking them through. And I learned a lot, right? Because when you build a business like that, you have to figure out that, hey, being a business owner is a whole lot more than just like buying real estate deals. It's managing people, it's marketing, it's running the numbers, it's taking risks, calculated risks, it's risking something and getting punched in the nose. And how do you deal with that, right? It's a mental game every day. It's consistency. It's like boom, 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 all these life skills that business teaches you. And I think that's probably the biggest thing about having your own business or even a side hustle is like, at the end of the day, if it's your thing, like the buck stops here and you really learn and are forced to learn and get better, or you suffer the consequences. And I think for me, that was super powerful to do in my late 20s, early 30s, really cut my teeth and just go into hyper growth mode because I had to. right? So that kind of got me into the real estate thing and into the finance thing and into all these things. And then, of course, I'm sure you've heard the 2008, 2009 story a gazillion times. Avalanche dropped on my head, more or less financially. I actually got hit by a snowmobile while I was snowboarding, broke my femur, and while I was laying in the hospital, the market crashed, and I had 16 properties going, and that was a real problem, right? Essentially, there was a large sucking noise, and that was my bank account being vacuumed out while I laid in the hospital, and properties went down. So from that, I learned a lot, and one of the things I know is you learn a lot more from failure than you do from success in many cases. And as my business was being gutted just because nobody could buy the houses that we had fixed and sold because lending evaporated, you learn a lot about like what's working, what isn't working. And I got pretty serious about cash flow and about tracking expenses and about marketing. And, when you're making a ton of money, it's easy to just like throw it all around all over the place. And when things tighten up, you get real serious about it. So I had a good 18-month intensive lesson in how to really manage things on a lean budget and make it happen. And so that was super important. But 2008, 2009, I decided real estate, I needed to take a break from it. A good friend of mine came along and hired me to get into the financial space. And I went to work for his firm because he said, listen, you've been a business owner, you have a finance background, you understand insurances and investments and all these different things, because one of the things that happens when you have a lot of money is everybody shows up and wants to teach you about how you can give them your money, right? So during those 5 or 6 years, I went down a lot of those rabbit holes and learned a lot. So he hired me as a coach, and that kind of got me to where I was working with people. Long story short, I just discovered I love working with people more than I love working with property. I think real estate's a fantastic vehicle, but for my day-to-day, every single day, I just love being able to impact people and take people who are making a lot of money but not keeping enough and show them how to keep a whole lot more, how to be smarter with it. And when they tell you, God, this just changed my life, or we don't fight about money anymore, or, we went from being on the treadmill of making a ton of money and spending every dollar of it to like really building wealth, like that's just a game changer for me. That just makes my heart sing. So I've stayed in this business, even though I do still dabble in real estate. I do still teach real estate. And actually, I'm kind of waiting for the market to pull back a little bit here so that we can jump back in, because I think real estate is just an incredible long-term vehicle.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I appreciate you giving us that context because it's very helpful to set up the rest of our conversation. I mean, there were 4 things, all with F's, that jump out to me, right? So flipping, femur, failure, and finances, right? So those are really, if I'm summarizing your story, you kind of, from your dad's construction background, just you said a quote about wanting to be the wheel, not just a cog on the wheel, but really wanting to be the wheel, and focusing on flipping was one way for you to do that. You're building this business, you're growing it, you've got your team, you then break your femur, in this snowmobile accident. From there, the market crashes. You are now faced with, some failures and some different successes. And looking at the situation, you're balancing that, trying to figure out how to navigate it. And you start focusing more on financials, just looking at your business and starting to help other people as well as you grew, and now focusing more on helping people versus the actual property side. So, you've got a great real estate background. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that. I want to get into, what you're doing right now with Big Life Financial. What exactly do you do? I mean, we talk about, I mentioned wealth strategists when I introduced you. I know that there's financial planners, there's tax there's a lot of words. And I honestly, and most of our listeners probably don't know what a wealth strategist is, from a, personal finance planner to whatever other titles there are. Can you just help give us a little bit of the landscape and help clarify what it is exactly that you do?
Absolutely. So I purposely don't use the word financial planner because that's associated with the guys who just stick all your money in the stock market, right? 401ks, IRAs, mutual funds, index funds, all that kind of stuff. And I'll just tell you straight out, like, I'm not a fan of the stock market for a lot of people. If you follow businesses and you want to dig in and do value investing and all of that, that's great. That's just not 99% of people, right? Just like someone who doesn't want to pay attention to real estate shouldn't be a real estate person. Someone who doesn't want to study the stock market, in my opinion, should not be saving their life savings there. My rule with investing is really you should invest in things you know about, things you care about, and things you control. And when I ask people, do you know about the stock market compared to those guys up on Wall Street? The answer is no, right? Do you care about it? Like if you didn't have money in there, would you pay attention to the market? And most people say, no, it's something I feel like I have to do, but they don't do it. And if the market was to crash tomorrow, and listen, we all just got a litmus test of that, right? In March, market crashed. What did you do? What were your options? Stay in for the long haul or get out and lose money? People don't have any control, right? If you're a professional investor and that's your deal, you know how to maneuver that. You know how to do calls and puts and other kinds of things that you can do to mitigate your risk. But the average person they're just on a roller coaster and they just go wherever it goes and they have no control. So in my mind, it's no different than gambling for the average person, right? So I feel like any investment, whether it's the stock market or it's real estate or it's Bitcoin or whatever you're into, your first investment should be in your education. You got to learn the rules of the game or you're not going to win, right? And that's just the straight up thing. So with a wealth strategist, I want to differentiate myself from those financial planners because we just don't do the same thing. And we really focus on two things at my firm. We do a bunch of other peripheral stuff, things like disability insurance and legal insurance and alternative investments. I have some guys on my team that do all that. But the big stuff that we really focus on, one is tax strategy, because so many people, it's just such an egregious amount of overpaying of taxes that's happening for business owners that we really want to help with that. And that comes from everything from how do you pay yourself to your write-offs to understanding if you qualify for research and development credits. And then the second thing we do is we teach something called the Money Maximization model, which actually syncs up beautifully with real estate, but it's a way to create your own banking system inside of a specifically structured life insurance policy, right? And a lot of people, when they hear life insurance, they think of a death benefit. This is not a death benefit strategy. It can be, but it's really a way to grow your money at a really nice clip, similar to what you'd get in the stock market, but with guaranteed rates of return. And the money's totally liquid, so you can take it and use it for real estate deals. So if you're trying to build up cash for real estate deals or to buy your own personal house or to buy a car, or you want to do these other things or other outside investments, this is a great place to get your money working. It works similar to it's not a savings account, but it's a savings vehicle where your money's always going up and growing at a really nice rate until you need it, right? That's why we put money into savings accounts, is to build it up until we need it. This is just a much better way to build that up. And it kind of fits within a bigger context of everything. But those are really the two things, helping people keep more of what they make with taxes and be smarter with it. And then we have people on our team that do things like alternative investments, because when you start making $400,000 or $500,000 a year plus, taxes get really ugly. Like they get real expensive. And in real estate, one of the best things is, of course, you've got these tax offsets for all your passive income. But if you're a high wage earner or you're W-2 and you make a lot of money, some of these alternative investments can be a heaven sent. And some of them are related to real estate and some of them aren't. But there's some really nice things that the guys on our team help people to put together so you can keep an extra 50, 100,000 plus per year and do good things with that.
And Derek, to that point, I mean, many people invest in real estate, in particular apartment syndications and larger apartment deals for those tax strategies. Certainly we love cash flow, we love the appreciation potential, but I think the kicker and the unwavering decision maker for many investors are the tax benefits. And it's something that, is always praised. I mean, you look at those folks who are wealthy and who continue to preserve their wealth, and having a sound tax strategy, it's a vital element of retaining that. I mean, what good does it do to make $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 if you're giving 45% of that right back to the government, right? So you are just working, busting your tail and giving away all this money. And I'm not trying to talk about tax avoidance. What I'm saying is, if you are understanding what the tax code wants you to do, taking those behaviors and protecting yourself in a way where you are actually doing the things and investing in the things that our society values, then you can find those strategies to help reduce your tax liability. With that said, because so many folks are looking at investing in real estate for the tax benefits, I want to quickly address a couple of those things. And then maybe we could talk a little bit more about some of the tax strategies that you see and that you help people employ. So from a real estate standpoint, especially when it comes to commercial, we're looking at things like bonus depreciation, right? So we have our regular depreciation and then the ability to accelerate that depreciation and take all of that in year one. That's one of the things that really is big and vital for many investors. That helps us to, basically deliver a paper loss in the first year of a project. So you can receive cash flow benefits and cash flow distributions, but on paper, you're actually taking a loss on your K-1 statement. Are you helping investors kind of understand strategies like that? And what are some of the other strategies that you are helping to employ with your clients so they can really take full advantages of the different tax strategies available to them?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things, and just for the record, I'm not a CPA. I have CPAs that work with us and for us. So I do the high level planning, but obviously we need to get in the trenches with your actual CPA to make sure that things make sense, right? Because this is a big mistake people make. They get caught up in the micro, right? Which is this one little piece. This one little piece is going to save me some taxes, but they don't look at like what's the macro ramifications of that. If that depletes a ton of your cash and now you can't go do other deals, if that messes with your mindset because you don't have access to cash, we need to consider all that stuff. So everything I'm going to say here is always an it depends. It's like this is on the table, but we need to determine how does this work in synchronicity with the other things that are going on in your business, right? Because there is a lot more than just this one piece. And I feel like that's probably the biggest downfall to any investment or any advisor is quite often they only see one piece of the pie and they don't always get how this domino might affect all the other dominoes. And we can do more harm than good sometimes. So, or sometimes you get lucky and it goes the other way. But I think being aware of that and having someone on your team that can help coordinate that makes a really, really big difference, as opposed to someone who just like your CPA might just look at taxes. And like a big mistake we see, and I'll come back to your point here, is like people are socking money away in a 401k and they think it's tax savings. And it's not. You're paying those taxes. You're just paying them later. And I would even argue for a lot of people that paying those taxes later may cost you more than paying them now, because we are in a historically low tax period right now. And so, and we don't know where we're going to be in retirement. If you do a bunch of syndications and you make a bunch of money, or you buy a bunch of property, you might be in a higher tax bracket in retirement. The tax brackets themselves may be much higher because with, all the stimulus that's going on and, that free money, I got some news for you. It ain't free. It's a loan, right? You're paying that money back at some point. It has to get paid back. So maybe everybody I talk to seems to think that taxes are going to be higher in the future. As soon as 3, 4, 5 years from now, we're going to have to see some tax hikes. So weighing that out with your CPA and saying, hey, I know you're just looking at this year and you want to pat yourself on the back and say, I put $40,000 away so I get this tax write-off. Yeah, that's great, but you have to pay it at some point. So you want to look at the big picture, right? And that's a big one we see. So coming back to what you were talking about with advantages in real estate, one that you were kind of talking about, and I'm not sure if you were specifically alluding to this, but things like cost segregation, right? Which is where you have someone come in and reclassify your real estate. And a lot of the real estate can be classified as equipment, right? And so what happens is equipment gets depreciated over 5, 7, 10, 15 years instead of a much longer period of time. You don't get to depreciate necessarily more, but you get money today instead of 30 years from now or whenever, right? So and you can take that money and go earn more money and all the other stuff, right? So cost segregation is definitely one that absolutely applies. And what you're talking about with the some of the bonus and new building stuff, there are some new tax codes just recently that talk about that. I'm going to tell you, because some of this stuff just came in with the CARES Act, there are some things where you can take net operating losses from this year and you can apply them to prior years, right? And so you may be able to take, let's say last year you had an income of $400,000 because you had a major deal close, and this year you're showing a loss. You may be able to take some of the losses from this year and actually retroactively apply them. We used to be able to carry those things forward, Now we can carry them back, at least for a short window of time here. So those are places where you can optimize. And the cool thing is, you can, when you go back, you already know what your tax liability is. So you can allocate things much more effectively. Like when we're carrying things forward, we don't know what the future holds, right? So that's another big opportunity, not just specific to real estate, but definitely applies to real estate because, especially when you're dealing with bigger projects, 1 year might not be so great. And the next year you might have 3 things close and all of a sudden you make a ton of money and have a windfall, right? And so being able to balance that out is another big thing. Another thing that I think applies to a lot of our real estate investors is there's a provision that came in with the Trump tax rewrite, something called 199A. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but essentially if you make more than 157.5 as an individual, or 315,000, right, which is just double, 315,000 as a married couple, if you make less than that, you can get a 20% discount on your taxes with qualified business income. But this also applies to certain income through certain types of REITs. So if you're investing in those kinds of things, it's worth exploring. Now, if you're way over that, if you're making $1 million a year, you're not going to be able to tuck yourself under that 315,000. But if you're at 350,000 or 330,000, or you're approaching 315,000, doing some things so that you can make sure your income this year is lower, so you can get that 20% deduction, can be a big savings. And if you've got a bunch of dividend income coming from REITs, being able to get discounts on that income as well can be advantageous. And there's a few other provisions, but it's one of those things. If you're in that income ballpark, that you want to be looking at and talking to your CPA about.
No, Derek, that's. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
The last thing I was going to say is, depending on what's going on with your business, corporate entity structuring, right? And this applies to any business. Like I've got a simple one here that one of my CPAs did. You won't be able to really read it, but like where we've got multiple structures for your business and we have one business pay the other, or you take certain income through certain businesses. Like within real estate, you may have a management company that over time is a C Corp and will pay less taxes than if you take all that through an S Corp. So entity structuring can be really beneficial within real estate over time. It can also be super beneficial because the way that you pay yourself, the way that you can pay your kids, the way that you can use your home, right? You talked about somebody who prior to us getting on here, who uses his home. There's something a lot of people don't know about called the Augusta rule. Are you familiar with this?
I'm not.
Yeah, so the Augusta rule says if you're a business owner, and this doesn't just apply to real estate, but it uses real estate because you've got your primary home involved. You can rent your home out for up to 14 days a year, income tax free. So the money that you make for those 14 days of rental, and listen, if you have multiple properties or whatever, maybe you can maneuver this. This really does apply to your primary residence, but I know sometimes people bounce back and forth, and so you can play with this. But what you can do with your business is, if you already use your business with your home for business purposes, like let's say you have employees over to do retreats, to do trainings, to do holiday parties, these kinds of things. I know that's a little weird with COVID right now, but you can rent your home to your business, and the business can pay you a consistent rate. So let's say you're using 1,000 square feet in your house to host a holiday party or to do a retreat for the team or whatever. You can look around at like, what would 1,000 square feet cost me to rent at a hotel? And maybe it's $2,000 for the day or for the weekend or whatever. You can pay yourself from your business to you. You want to document this, right? Work with your CPA to do that, but you want a real lease. But that money comes into your home income tax free. If you're in a really high income tax bracket, that can be pretty significant. Even if you're in a lower tax bracket and you're renting it for $1,000 a day, that's $14,000 a year at a 25% tax bracket. It's $3,000-$4,000 a year. But what I know about taxes is, for the most part, it's not a silver bullet. It's a bunch of things that add up. You save $3,000 here and $5,000 here and $10,000 here. Something like cost segregation can be a big silver bullet. Research and development credits can be massive for people if it applies to your business. But for the most part, it's just a bunch of little things, 5,000 here, 10,000 here, 5,000 here, another 15,000 there. It can really make a big, big difference tax wise and add up to 20, 30, 50, $100,000 a year in savings. And where I come from, that pays for a lot of kids to go to college. It's kind of a big deal.
Absolutely, man. Those are great insights right there. I mean, the 199A, I'm not as familiar with, so I think that was great. Anyone listening to this, we'll put a link to that in the show notes, but check that out for yourself. And then your idea on leasing your space back, I think right now with so many people working remotely, working from home, that's a big one for people to think about. Question there is like, with so many people working remotely, if you are a business owner, let's just say like right now where, I'm in my home office recording this with you,
Sure.
maybe doing webinars or seminars. And maybe in the past we would have been traveling to these events. Now I'm hosting them from my house virtually. Would something like that qualify for kind of this leased reduction if I'm not physically having people over at my house, but I'm using my home office for an activity like that?
Well, so there's two different things here, right? There's the home office, which is a totally different deduction, right? You can just write off. So if you're using, simple example, you have a 2,000 square foot house, you're using 500 square feet of that legitimately exclusively for business purposes. Doesn't mean you have a computer in the living room. It means like you actually have a business space. Then you should be able to write off 20, 25% of that mortgage, right? What we're talking about here is something separate where you're using a bigger amount of the space. So let's say you do bring the business, like you said, and you set up the whole house and you rent the space. You would have had to do it at a hotel or something anyway, and you're doing something separate from your business office. You set up the whole photo shoot or, the living room and all the other space and use it that way, then it would apply to that. But I want you to be clear that the two are separate things. One is your everyday business space and the expenses there. This is if you were to do something in addition to that and rent out the majority of the house or the whole house that way. So they are two different things. You should absolutely, especially in today's business environment, I don't think there's any question that people have exclusive business spaces, and you should document it. You should take pictures of it. Like, this is a really big thing with taxes is your CPA will tell you, oh, that's the gray area. And you're like, no, actually, I took pictures of it. All it is an office. There's no kid's bedroom in the side. There's no, no jungle gym in there or whatever. Like, this is clearly set up for me to film and to do business in. There's no gray area about that, right? Like, that is straight up. And so many people get scared about taxes. The key to that whole thing is be proactive and document it. Do legitimate stuff. And there's a ton of stuff you were going to do anyway with your life, like business travel. Make those trips, turn those into trips, but make them legitimate. Plan it in advance, document the trip, and then you're ironclad. It takes a lot of stuff that can appear to be in the gray area because people do abuse it. They just take their kids to SeaWorld in San Diego, call it a business trip. That's bogus. But if there's a conference in San Diego and you happen to stay a couple of extra days, you can write some of that trip off. Not the SeaWorld part, but the other part, right? So do this stuff proactively and do it on purpose. If you document it, it's ironclad. You're good.
So, Derek, I think that leads us to, one of the biggest challenges that people have, right? So some of the things you're saying right now, maybe the first time listeners are hearing these concepts and they're asking, well, how come my CPA didn't tell me about that? Or maybe they go talk to their CPA and they say, no, that's not how you do it, or no, he's wrong, or that's not right. And we get that all the time with real estate too, right? You start talking to people about, what they can write off on the taxes. You mentioned cost segregation and bonus depreciation. And I don't want our listeners to get caught up with the technological terms, but the point is you can reduce your tax liability through some of these channels. But if you go to your CPA, they may tell you, no, you can't do that, or I'm not familiar with that, or I haven't heard of it. Why is there a disconnect with some of these tax strategies when talking to CPAs, especially people who we believe are supposed to be the tax experts when it comes to what we can take deductions for and what we can't?
Yeah. So there's a couple pieces to that. The first one is this, and this is just human nature. CPAs are people too. And in every occupation, there's people who are good at what they do and people who are not so good. There are some CPAs out there who are incredible, would blow your doors off. And there are a bunch of them who aren't that good, right? Like, that's just how society works at everything. Your mechanic, your dentist, your whatever, your guy who works at the grocery store, right? So they're people too. Most of them want to do the lowest common denominator or the easiest amount of work, right? How do they make the most and do the least? The problem for them is if you go out there and you take full advantage of the tax code, if they ever have to answer for it, that's a lot of work for them. And the truth is, if you're optimizing the hell out of this stuff, you might end up paying a little bit. You might get audited once or twice more than the average person. But for you, it might be 7 figures worth of extra money to have to deal with an audit one extra time in your life. But the CPA doesn't want that. So he's got no incentive because he's not paying your taxes. You are. He's got no incentive to say, yeah, let's do the extra work because he doesn't make any extra money and it's extra work. So it's easy for him to say, nah, don't do that. Nah, don't do that. Nah, don't do that, right? Just like an attorney. He has no incentive to tell you, yeah, go for it. Because if he's wrong, it's his butt. If he tells you never to do anything, he's fine. And he's still got to collect his fees, right? So we have to remember human beings have a tendency to do what's in their best interest. What a CPA in my world thinks is their best interest is, let's save our clients a ton of money. We can charge a little extra for our services because we know they probably get audited, but they get an extra 7 figures out of it during their lifetime. And we get an extra 6 figures out of it somewhere during this lifetime, right? We're creating more value for them and we make a little more money for it. And that's the reality is there's tax recorders and there are tax advisors. You want a tax advisor, someone who's proactively meeting with you. They're bringing strategies to the table. If they didn't bring 199.80 or your table or cost segregation to the table when these things became available or when you bought your first commercial property, they should be. And if they're not, either A, they're lazy, or B, they don't know. Neither of those is good for you, right? And so as you make more money, these professionals on your team, whether that's your real estate team, your mortgage team, your tax advisors, your financial advisors, they become more important because the dollars are bigger. There's more at stake. And so you will likely have to upgrade your team. If you're paying less than $5,000 or $10,000 a year in taxes, it's probably not a big deal. There's not that much on the table. Once you start paying $20,000, $30,000, $50,000, $100,000 a year in taxes, this becomes really important. So, don't be afraid to get a second opinion. And our belief is this. You can amend taxes every 3 years. So even if you have the greatest guy in the world, in my opinion, if you're paying more than 10 grand in taxes, it's worth going to a second CPA at some point and saying, hey, I just want to pay for your time to review my existing taxes. Let's look at the last 3 years. I'll pay you for a couple hours, $300, $400, $500. Just see if I'm missing anything. And maybe they'll tell you it's great. And you paid them for their time. They got paid. Your person's doing good. But more often than not, they'll find something. They'll say, hey, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? And that doesn't mean your CPA is a bad person. It may mean that some things changed and they didn't realize it, or they just kind of were in their autopilot. That stuff happens. But it really, over time, what that does is it weeds out and ensures that you're dealing with the right people. And if you're not dealing with someone who's great, it's costing you a lot of money. And this applies to everything, not just taxes. But taxes are just such a large cost. They're literally the biggest cost in your life. More than your kids, if you can believe it. So it's a big deal. So having a good team makes a big difference.
That's great advice there. And I mean, to your point on just getting someone else to review it, ultimately you're always going to be upgrading your team, just like, in sports or anything else. As you grow, you need people who can grow with you. Some of those folks will remain on your team. Sometimes you're going to have to change out, whether it be a CPA or an attorney or someone else, to get someone that kind of matches where you're at and has those advanced strategies. And I love your point on just continuing to review, getting some independent opinions just to make sure you are building the right team and you're having folks who are, looking out for your best interest. If you're thinking right now about, your CPA or anyone on your team for that matter, and trying to figure out ways to, make sure you have the right people on your team. Is there kind of a go-to question or something specifically that you can look at to make that determination to say, yep, this person is right, or maybe it's time to explore some new options?
To me, there's two really easy things, and you don't even have to ask the question. It's based on past performance, right? If you've been with your person more than 2 years, let's say, if they're not actively bringing ideas to the table, that's probably a red flag. Like if you're coming to them like, hey, should we do this thing? And they're like, oh yeah, that seems like a great idea. That's a red flag, right? The second thing is if they're not proactively meeting with you And I'm not saying you need to meet with them every month. Some people do, and they review cash flow and all that, and that's super great. But if you're not meeting with them 2 or 3 times a year, just to say, hey, here's where we're at for the year. Here's what's going on income-wise. Here's some things that we see coming up. If they're not doing that with you, even if they have the best of intentions, it's kind of like having that trainer who's like, yeah, we should really work out. And then they just never set an appointment and you don't get in shape, right? So you need to have that proactive person who's going to do it for you. And one of my tips for clients is, if you like your CPA and you're working with them, they all want to be proactive and a lot of them aren't. So you can take it upon yourself, because ultimately you can't delegate personal responsibility. It's your money, it's your income, it's your taxes, right? You can't blame anybody else. So what you do is, before you leave your current tax meeting with your tax person, set the next one. A quarter out, 3, 4, 5 months out. Yeah, let's do that. We've got some things going on. Let's meet in 3 months. Put it on the calendar before you leave the office. That will ensure that you're making them be proactive. And a lot of CPAs who aren't naturally proactive because they've got hundreds of clients, they will be if you force them to be, and they'll be great. And you can take someone who's maybe good as an advisor, but put them in an advisory role instead of a recorder role, right? Like if you really like your person, you can help them. But if they're not meeting with you proactively, there's only so much you can do after December 31st. And most of it is dump money into your 401k. And that's terrible for real estate investors, in my opinion, because you lose control of your money. And I know you can do self-directed IRAs and all that stuff, but there's so many hoops to jump through. If you got money stuck in those accounts, that's fine. I mean, you make the best out of a bad situation. But in my opinion, if you want to do real estate, don't go dumping money into things where it's hard to get to it and you can only get to certain amounts of it. And if you need it for something else, it's a penalty. I just think it's a terrible idea. For some people, it works. They're totally brain off. That's not the group that's on this podcast, right? For people who are listening to this, in my opinion, I can draw kind of a brush stroke here and say, most of you should not be putting money into a 401k or an IRA, because you're losing control of your money. You can't do the real estate that you want to do.
Great insights there, Derek. We're going to transition to our bullseye round. You ready?
Let's do it.
Give me a failure or an apparent failure that set you up for later success.
Well, the easiest one is the 2008-2009 crash. What I learned from that is a couple of things. One, I can handle a lot more than I think I can. So that helps me to not be so scared or afraid. 2, I got a kind of a spiritual awakening out of it. And that might sound crazy, but I really learned how to process stress and really how important my health is. And that might sound crazy, but one of my friends, he's got a massive trust. I sit on the board of it. Tens or I don't know if he's to hundreds of millions of dollars yet, but essentially one of his things in his trust says fit body, fit business. How you take care of your body, how you take care of your mind rolls into your business. And so I learned at that point how to really take care of myself. I was in my early 30s and that's a transition anyway, but I just learned how important health and mental well-being were during that period of time.
Give me a book you've recommended or gifted the most in the last year.
Probably Atomic Habits by James Clear, right? It probably comes up a lot, right? But the quote that comes from that I absolutely love, he says, you don't rise to the level of your willpower, you sink to the level of your systems, right? And that's one of the things I live by with what we teach financially is we want to systematize our finances, systematize your savings, systematize your income, systematize your tracking. If you do that, you get wealthier every month. And if you don't, usually you're treading water at best.
Yeah, I was cheesing as you said that. That's been my most recommended and referred book as well over this last year. So big smiles for that book by James Clear. It's a phenomenal book. If you haven't checked it out, please do. Give me the digital or mobile resource you recommend for your business.
Two things that I use all the time. One is Evernote. I know it's not anything new. And I really love ActiveCampaign. We use that for all of our client, for our lead capture stuff. And I use ClickFunnels in conjunction with it. ClickFunnels is awesome. But ClickFunnels and ActiveCampaign to capture people who are interested. and then to be able to correspond with them in a really effective, intuitive way. I think it's great. I've worked with Infusionsoft, I've worked with Aweber, I've worked with MailChimp. And to me, ActiveCampaign is robust enough without being confusing, because Infusionsoft gets a little crazy.
Give me a daily habit that helps you stay focused on your goals.
There's a couple of those. I think for me, taking a few minutes every night before I leave the office to plan the next day. Because what I find is at the end of the day, like Hemingway said, he used to always write until he knew what was going to happen next, and that's where he'd stop. So the next day he got to start on the downhill slide, right? Like he knew where he was going. So the same thing with my business. At the end of the day, take 5 minutes, take all my to-do stuff or the things that I'm working on that maybe didn't get completed or need to follow up tomorrow, transfer those to the next page. I like live and die by this thing. Got one of these, right? That I live and die by. Left side is all my notes for the day. Right side is my to-do list and all my tasks. But just transferring all those tasks to the next day, making a plan for the next day, so that when I come into it, like I found if I don't do this, the beginning of my day is what should I do today? And sometimes I just never really get on track the same way. If I have that already planned out, already mapped out, it really helps me to hit the day running.
What's one thing you know now that you wish you knew when you were starting out?
I think I kind of knew this, but I didn't know to the extent that wealth building and building a business is a marathon, not a sprint, right? I think we have a tendency to treat it like a series of sprints. Like when I wrote my first book, it was like, oh my gosh, once I get this book written, it's just going to go, right? What I found was what I thought was the top of the mountain was base camp. It's like, oh, now you have a book. Now you get to promote it. Now you get to revise it. Now you get to, and it's like, oh, wow, I thought that was the end of the work. It was just the beginning. And same thing with every element of my business. It's like, oh, first I want to get really good at what I do. And then it's like, oh, but that's just the basis. Now you can build a team. Oh, well, that's just the basis. Now you can really scale. It's like, it just keeps expanding. And so I think the key to that for me mentally is just taking it on, knowing that it's a process. There's not really a destination there. It really is a journey the whole time. And to enjoy that and embrace that, and really focus on doing work that matters to you, because you're probably going to be doing it the rest of your life.
What are you curious about right now?
Besides the election results?
Well, and by the time this comes out, the election results will be known. So let's pick something else.
I am really interested to see what happens with the economy. Everything about the economy says we should have had a pullback in 2018. And then we had the tax rewrite, which gave companies a bunch of extra money, which they used to buy their own stocks back and kept the stock market high. And everybody's blaming what happened or what has been happening with the economy on coronavirus. But the truth was a lot of that was coming anyway. And then we dumped all this money, right? Like more money went into savings accounts in April than has ever gone into savings account in any entire year. Like that's how much money went into the economy. And we're about to do another round of it. By the time you're listening, it's probably already happened. But I'm really interested to see what we're going to do, because the government has played all its cards, right? The Fed has dropped rates to zero. We've got by the time you hear this, probably $5 trillion new dollars in economic stimulus and in debt for our country that at some point has to be reconciled. People have been we've had moratoriums on foreclosures and evictions. And so we've created all this non-free market stuff that's been pumped into the economy. So I'm really genuinely curious to see what this does. Does it create massive inflation? I just did a huge video on that on my YouTube channel. Does it create, maybe inflation's a good thing. All these people who are in student loan debts, like all their debt gets way cheaper, right? Housing prices rise, but so do incomes, and technology has also been helping us with keeping things cheap even during an inflationary period. So I'm really interested to see how it all plays out. I have my thoughts, but man, we don't know. Could we get another stimulus in January? And they just keep kicking the can down the road. I just don't know. So I'm super curious about the whole thing.
And you are in Draper, Utah, I believe. Give me the best place to grab a bite out there.
Our favorite place is somewhere, it's up on the up on the hill here at the south end of Salt Lake called The Ridge. And the food is nice. It's kind of like an Italian pizza kind of place, but it's just beautiful. It's right on the edge of the hill, and there's a nice breeze, and you can sit outside. And yeah, that's kind of our favorite little close to home go-to place. There are a couple of nicer places, but that one's one of our favorites.
Derick, how can our listeners get in touch with you?
Easiest way is to just visit our site, biglifefinancial.com. We give away a free book on there that really breaks down that whole banking system I talked about. And it's a fantastic system for if you want to get into your first investment or you're trying to build up money to get into some of these syndications. The banking system's a great way to build up that cash. So that book talks about how that works. And also, honestly, I'm working really hard on our YouTube channel. I do 2 videos a week, and you can just find that at biglifefinancial.com/YouTube. And do things like all kinds of different financial strategies and tips and tax stuff. And like I said, I did a video on inflation recently. But biglifefinancial.com/YouTube would be great.
Well, Derick, listen, I appreciate you coming on the show. You gave a lot of great information. I really enjoyed listening to your personal journey, your personal story as far as, really getting into flipping, making that transition. You broke your femur, you get into, ultimately, this rough period with your current portfolio. And then you obviously transition out of that, getting into more of the finance world and helping other people out. Love your feedback and direction on tax strategies, the way to think about approaching your CPAs to maybe get more out of them. Maybe you have a good CPA, but you need to be more proactive in getting the strategies and advice you need. And then if not, there's certainly ways to figure that out and to make adjustments with your team overall if you need to. But really great information in this episode. Hope our listeners are taking notes. And if not, feel free to rewind back and replay anything that you played. And then obviously we didn't get a chance to go deep into the insurance strategy to use your insurance as kind of its own bank. So certainly check out your free download that's on your website at Big Life Financial. We really enjoyed this conversation. We hope to stay close to you and look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks for coming on Target Market Insights, the Multifamily Marketing Show.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.